Chelsea, welcome to episode 1 of season 5. So looking forward to having a conversation with you. It does seem these days like everybody is talking about critical minerals and resource development. I'm looking forward to diving into that topic, but first wanted to learn a little bit about your background. So tell me a little bit about you and your origin story when it comes to mining.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. So my name is Chelsea. I did an undergraduate and graduate degree in environmental science at Acadia University in Nova Scotia. So I have worked now at an organization called Mining Matters. And basically, we're a nonprofit organization that gets to travel across Canada teaching youth about earth sciences, mining, engineering, sustainability, and geology. So all sorts of different things. So I get to go to really remote communities, urban communities, and have these conversations about rocks, minerals, sustainability, and mining. So that's kind of where I get this foundational knowledge, where I teach these youth about these topics within mining. It's so critical to Canada. So it's been amazing having these conversations and using my environmental science degree within those conversations.
Even though we are in our 5th season, as I mentioned, it's always good to go back to the beginning for people who perhaps are new to mining. So I would love it if you could just define what mining is, and then you're going to share with us a presentation that you give to grade 4 students that helps people really wrap their heads around what mining is. So walk us through that.
Awesome. So mining is the process of extracting resources from our earth. These are non-renewable resources, which means they can't be replenished within the time frame that we extract them. So we have a finite amount of these supplies. And when we're talking about mining, we're really trying to understand the cycle in which we mine. So how does this happen? How does this work? So there's 4 main steps where we have mining. First is exploration. So we're finding the material. We're making sure it's going to be a profitable location. We're finding all the supplies that we need. Once we find that, so if we're looking for gold, for example, once we find our gold and there's enough there for us to develop a mine, we move into development. So this is where we are buying all of our equipment, we're building our buildings, we are making sure that we've hired our employees, we're getting all of our permits in place to start our mine, which leads us into operation. So this is operating our mine, running it. And then finally, reclamation. So reclamation is different than restoration. Reclamation is reclaiming the land, so making that space usable again by plants, animals, and people. So we're never going to be able to restore the land, just like when we dig a sand pit at the beach. We can fill it in, but the sand's a different color. It's maybe not as level as it used to be. So it's never going to be exactly the same, but we can reclaim it. So an activity we love to do with our grade 4 students is taking a multicolored cookie, the chocolate chip cookie, a rainbow chocolate chip cookie, and we get them to go through the process of buying equipment, what they're going to mine with to get all the chocolate chips out of the cookie. So they use a toothpick, or they could pay a lot more money for a paper clip, things like that. They're going to use different tools to mine out our chocolate chips. They also have to buy land. So they're going to buy their access to the land, which has a lake, a caribou migration route, and a road on that land. So how is this going to play a role in their mining process? Then they're going to mine. So they'll have 2 minutes to extract as many chocolate chips as they can from their cookie. And they're going to get paid based on the chocolate chips and the color of those chocolate chips that they extract. So it's always a really fun activity, because they get to compare how much each person is making with their mine, what differences they had. So maybe some mines had more profitable chocolate chips, and some people were faster than others. But then we also get into reclamation, and that's managing their crumbs. So we give fines based on where their crumbs are allocated to. So if there are crumbs in the lake, they have to pay for water treatment at that lake. If there's crumbs on the road, they're blocking the road from access to community members. So they're going to have to pay for cleanup of that road. So we really try to introduce this in something that they can physically hold, something that they can interact with, to introduce these principles of exploration, development, operation, and reclamation.
Okay, I have to say, after many episodes hosting this show, I don't think I've ever heard a better definition of what mining is, and I appreciate the chocolate chip cookie analogy as well. Makes it really clear. I think another question that people have is, what are we mining? You know, as I mentioned, we hear a lot of conversations around critical minerals. So what's the difference between minerals, rocks, and ore? Can you walk us through the difference between each of those, just so people have a better sense of what's happening today when it comes to mining?
Absolutely. So starting with the difference between minerals, rocks, and ores. So minerals are a pure substance. They're one thing, is the way we like to describe it. And a rock is a mixture. So it's made up of two or more minerals. So I like to use an analogy of a cake. Our minerals is our flour, our eggs, our sugar, and our rock is mixing it up, and we have a cake. So we have something new that's formed from our minerals. Now you could have a very poorly mixed cake where you could maybe see chunks of sugar, chunks of butter, but you could have a really well mixed cake where you can't see all those individual minerals or individual ingredients. So an ore is something that has economic value. So it could be a metal bearing mineral. If we're trying to look for copper, we would call it copper ore. So it's going to have that metal of interest inside of it. But what we're mining in Canada, we have lots of gold mines, diamond mines, we have all sorts of different mining, but there's a huge focus now and moving forward on critical minerals mining. So that could be copper, nickel, iron, and rare earth elements, all sorts of different items that we're going to hopefully be mining within the future.
Also, an amazing explanation. When you think about explaining both mining as well as talking about the materials to younger people, what value do you think there is insofar as walking through this next generation into these definitions and explanations of what our earth science is?
Mhm. Yeah, there's a lot of value in teaching this so early on and having this fundamental knowledge of minerals, rocks, because it's what we are physically standing on. This is a part of our earth. This is not something that's being manufactured. This is not something that can be made or replaced. It is something that we are actively walking on or seeing all around us. So having an understanding of how these different minerals and rocks play a role in global trade, economics, but also just in the formation of our landscape. So mountains, lakes, all these different impacts that these different minerals and rocks can have on our environment is super critical. And introducing that so young, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid going to a beach, I loved collecting all the different rocks that I could find because they're just so fascinating, seeing how they all form and thinking about the fact that they formed millions of years ago. They didn't just form last week. So it's really great to introduce these concepts so they have an understanding of what's happening right now on our earth and historically what has happened and how that can benefit us or be used by us.
I think one of the most exciting things about having these conversations with young people is that they are always so curious. I certainly felt that way as a child, like you asked, enjoyed my time on the beach in Prince Edward Island when I was growing up and just discovering new rocks and collecting them. I mean, that curiosity is kind of baked into you as a child. When you watch young people learn about mining, can you tell me a little bit about what happens when that kind of light bulb goes off, when you see that they understand what mining is?
Yeah, it's an incredible experience to be able to see that light bulb go off when I'm teaching courses about rocks, minerals, and they come in at lunchtime with rocks they find outside. What is this? What does it tell us about the environment? So, introducing these concepts also introduces the possibility of jobs, inspiring for the future, but just kind of having that light bulb moment of these are things from our earth, we use them and we clean up after them. My favorite light bulb is really with the cookie mining activity is when they have to clean up and some groups are paying lots of money and some groups aren't paying lots of money, and this conversation of why are you paying more for reclamation than somebody else? And just having this conversation of being clean, what makes an effective mine? So, having the resources available and also managing your time well. So, being efficient in timing, just having these conversations and breaking it down into things that they can understand really sparks that excitement, that joy, and that visibility about mining. Because when I was in high school, I didn't have a single course for earth science and environmental science like they do now, which is amazing to see. So when I went into university and I'm learning about geology just in university, it was a lot to take in because we never had those conversations. So having rocks and minerals in the grade 4 curriculum and then following through with courses in high school that can support that foundational knowledge is amazing for them seeing what's out there and what's available to them.
Still today, even with access to so much information in our world, there are some outdated perceptions of mining. And I don't want to blame people for that, because I certainly felt that way when I came into this industry and was learning about mining myself. Can you talk a little bit about how things have changed over the years to actually shift that perception?
Absolutely. And I completely agree with you. When I was doing my environmental science degree and then going into mining education, there was a quick understanding of how things have changed because we always assume mining means bad for the environment. But that's not necessarily the case. Mining means changing an environment for sure, but we are using resources that we need for modern technology and the development of future innovations. So when we're talking about mining, some common misconceptions is they think it's like the game Minecraft, where you're walking through a tunnel, you're using a pickaxe, and you're just mining away. Well, that's not entirely the case. We've increased safety exponentially with mining. We can start using autonomous driving vehicles, drones to use within our mine shafts to increase safety, so that way we're not risking the lives of our workers. We can also, we're also increasing the job availability, but we've done a lot to increase the environmental safety aspects, the Indigenous consultation, specifically in Canada. I can only speak on Canadian mining because different countries have different goals. But for Canada, increasing reclamation, but now you have to prepay for reclaiming your mine site. As of about 1969 is when that started in Canada. So there's no more abandoned mine sites that are actively being mined. So that's amazing that we're prepaying for cleanup in advance. And that's a huge investment that you have to do within mining to start it up. But that's good because we're kind of deterring people who maybe wouldn't clean up after the mine site. So that's something that's been an incredible change. Having various environmental assessments, because they're managed on a federal, provincial, and municipal level, making sure that everything is by code being followed. There are permits in place. There's consultation with Indigenous communities, really makes sure that these mining operations are supported by community, by people, and then by environmental practices. So one example of this is in the Agnico Eagle mine in Rankin Inlet, it's the Meliadine mine. They shut down the access road to the mine during caribou migration season. So that's something, it's something simple, but something that makes a huge impact for Indigenous communities, their food source, and also for the caribou themselves, and having minimal impact from that mine on the surrounding animals and environment. So that's something really amazing that we're starting to see as we start developing more and more mines throughout Canada. We have this focus on environment, safety, and Indigenous consultation.
All of these conversations, I think, are so important, especially today as we hear more about Canada's future, Ontario's future, the future of critical minerals, which are also called strategic minerals. So when someone hears that term critical minerals, can you break down what exactly that means?
Yeah, so a critical mineral, specifically Canada's critical minerals, is a list of approximately 34 metals, non-metals, and minerals that are important to Canada for a few reasons. First, trade policy, politics, and scarcity, but they're also all relevant to modern technology. That's why this list was made. So if we want to develop more renewable energy, we need to mine these critical minerals to make that renewable energy. Or looking at our smartphones or our laptops, all of this comes from this subset of 34 minerals and metals that are used within that technology. So this is how this list was formed. Every country is going to have a slightly different list because it depends on also what's available to you. So the items on this list also have to be feasible to be mined within Canada. And the whole reliance on critical minerals is, since they're so important for modern technology and global trade and economics, if we can start mining more of these supplies in Canada, then we can have a little bit more self-sufficiency. We can have more jobs, more economic growth, and less reliance on global trade, because we like to see we're seeing a lot of that in the news today, is the impacts when you stop trade with somebody, or the impacts of having a monopoly on a resource. So being the only person that owns something, how does that impact everything else?
I think you touched on this a little bit, but can you expand on why mining should matter to the average Canadian, especially at this moment in time?
Absolutely. Yeah. So more economic growth for Canada. So we're talking more jobs, more self-reliance. Now that there's opening trade between different provinces, that can have a real impact on that as well. So increasing the security of our supply chains, having a reliance on one country or even one person in your family, having a reliance on your parents to always pay for a birthday present for you. You kind of are dependent upon that. So going out and being able to get your own money to buy your own birthday present makes it so you're self-sufficient and you can depend on yourself. So that's kind of the simple explanation of it. But more jobs is great. Also increasing the amount of productions here can increase our exports and help with our global trade for sure. Because we also, when we're considering critical minerals, it's what would happen if we wouldn't have one of these materials. So I like to use an example of, you're going to play volleyball and you don't have your running shoes. What would be the first thing you'd do? Okay, well, maybe you might try to call your parents to bring your running shoes. Okay, well, if you can't bring running shoes, or you might ask your friends, well, what happens if those don't work? Maybe you'll try to find a substitution. So you'll try using sandals or your socks. Well, if that doesn't work, you're kind of left with the option of not being able to play. So the same thing comes with aluminum, for example. If we are running low on aluminum, or if I don't have it right now, first thing I'm going to try to do is find another source of aluminum. Is there somewhere else I can get it from? Is there somewhere I can mine it from here, or somebody else I can borrow it from? Then if those aren't options, you try to substitute. Is there something we can use in replacement of aluminum? So, aluminum foil, is there some other alternative we can use that doesn't use aluminum? If that doesn't work, then you need to start to contemplate what's going to happen when there is no aluminum. So maybe you're going to have to start developing new products that don't rely on that aluminum. So it kind of is all interconnected there. And that's why there's such a focus on developing more mining practices within Canada for critical minerals. And that is seriously going to increase the economic growth and self-reliance.
You touched a little bit on jobs. When we look at the mining industry, what are some of those jobs that do exist right now, those opportunities, again, especially for the next generation?
Absolutely. And when we're looking at jobs, we need to have an understanding typically how a mine site operates. And typically how it operates is it's in a more remote area. It has workers coming in 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off, where they work 12-hour days, work for 2 weeks, and then go home for 2 weeks. So a mining operation is its own community. They have to have buildings to house those workers. They have to have janitors cleaning the rooms, chefs cooking. They have to have people designing all of that. So mine engineers, geologists finding the material. You have to have maintenance workers, welders, haul truck drivers. It is such a huge operation. We always think of just miner or driller when it comes to different jobs on a mine site. But because it's its own community, it needs a whole system in place. Administration staff are going to lead all of this. There's going to be pilots. There's going to be, even school bus drivers for one of the mines I was in that transport the workers from the airport to the mine facility. So it's such a big conversation and such a big job market because there are so many different things within it and so many varying levels of education required. So it can go anywhere from training on site, having a driver's license, all the way up to having a bachelor's degree in mining engineering or geology or environmental safety, health and safety. So there are so many different jobs that can be found on a mine site that really there's a job for everyone. And when I go to some of these more remote communities, something that's a real draw to a lot of the students is the fact that it's also reliable and safe accommodations for 2 weeks. So that's something that has been a draw in some of my, communities where there might be challenging family situations. So having a safe place to stay with food given to you for 2 weeks, eases that load as well. So that has been something I've had conversations with youth that are 17, 18, about to enter the workforce. And they were really drawn to that fact that they had somewhere to go. The flights are all paid for within the mining company. So they were going to be, safe and housed for 2 weeks.
Finally, one last question for you. When you do talk to these young people about the opportunities in mining, if you can kind of sum it up in one sentence, what do you say to them about the fact that there is a place for everyone in the mining industry?
Yeah, so I really ask them what their interests are. Where do you want to go in your life? And typically, because there's so many different options on a mine site, that can closely align with the job that's offered there. There are so many education programs too and training programs for Indigenous youth as well. So oftentimes I'm in remote Indigenous communities. So having those conversations with them about what's available to you. And we all, it'd be nice to value education, but sometimes students aren't prepared to pursue education. So knowing that there's still options for them where they will have access to all these things. There's a lot of mine sites have gyms and all sorts of extracurricular activities as well. But knowing that there's options for them is really amazing. And especially where we have a lot of Indigenous communities that are very close to mine sites. So one example to me is Lynn Lake in Manitoba. It's going to be they're in the process of opening a new gold mine there. But having that be right in their community, since it's so far removed from other communities, having it right there, they can stay at home, they can stay with their families and have a secure job for 10, 20 years, as long as that mine's going to operate, is amazing to know for them. And they did have previous mining in the region, but this is a new gold mine coming in and they've treated all of their water. That's been a stipulation, a part of opening the mining practice there. So they treated all of their water. They now have clean drinking water. And that's just to see that and see these educational programs that this mine company is funding in their schools. I've been there 3 times now. So kind of having that relationship between jobs, staying in your community, and community growth has been really amazing with some of these youth.
Well, listen, for people who are interested in more information about what you teach and the subject of mining, what are your recommendations in terms of places to go?
Ooh, in terms of places to go. So we have, for understanding more about mining and where we go as Mining Matters, we do have a website you can look out for. But in terms of places to go to understand the impact of mining on direct communities, I went to Trail BC and they have a refinery within the community there. And that was really amazing to see the whole operation, how the community was built around it. I've been to Meliadine Mine in Rankin Inlet. I've been close to Salowit, so the nickel mine by Glencore. And I find it's always very interesting, slightly off topic, but when we're talking about critical minerals and we're talking about global trade, we talk about extraction, so mining, then refining, which is taking that mineral and making it into gold or bars of metal that we could then use to manufacture items, so our smartphones, things like that. But something that's mined in Canada is most likely refined somewhere else. So the nickel that's mined in northern Quebec is refined in Norway it comes back as metal bars and then manufactured in another part of the country into a smartphone. So another country, apologies, to a smartphone. So talking about that whole global trade aspect is also incredibly important, that it's not just one area that does everything. But in terms of places I would go within Canada, it would have to be those few. Lynn Lake as well was very interesting to see the previous mining operation, because they had one there 20 to 40 years ago, and now a new operation coming in, fixing everything that the previous operation had left behind. So that was a really amazing opportunity to see that as well.
Amazing. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us today on This is Mining, the podcast. Really appreciate you breaking down what mining is, talking about different types of materials, especially critical minerals, and really appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.